Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are joining us from. I'm Sarah Pitcock. I'm the CEO of the National Summer Learning Association, and I want to thank you for joining us today for a webinar we are very excited about Ready for Fall, the latest in summer learning research out of the Wallace Foundation and the RAND Corporation. I want to start with a little bit of housekeeping. We have a lot of participants on this webinar, so your phone lines are automatically muted. But we want to hear from you throughout the webinar, so please use your chat box to submit your questions. You'll find your chat box at the top of your screen. If you click on chat, it should pop up. And then we ask that you send your chat to all participants, or at least all panelists, so that we can all see them and answer your questions as we go. And last piece of housekeeping is that we will have the world's shortest poll at the end of our webinar. It is one question, and it's very important to us that you answer it. So we ask that you please stay on until the end and answer our poll question to give us some feedback and tell us how you'll use what you learned today. So with that, I'm going to introduce our speakers for today. Our first speaker, I'm waiting for slides to advance, is Ann Stone. She's a Senior Research and Evaluation Officer from the Wallace Foundation. She'll talk about the big picture of the research that the Wallace Foundation is funding on summer learning. Then we'll hear from Catherine Augustine, who's a Senior Policy Researcher at the RAND Corporation. She'll talk about what they've learned from looking across 5 districts over the past couple of years and give us some of the findings and kind of the implications for the field. And then we'll hear from Christine Cray, who's a project manager at Pittsburgh Public Schools. And Christine will give the district perspective as a part of this study, but also as a district that is really leading the way and continuously improving their summer learning programs. She'll share what they're learning, what they're changing, and how what they're learning in summer is actually influencing what they're doing in the school year. So a little bit about the National Summer Learning Association. We're so happy that you joined us today. If you don't know about NSLA, we are the only national nonprofit that's exclusively focused on closing the achievement gap by increasing access to high-quality summer learning programs. And we do this in 3 main ways. So we work to recognize and disseminate what works in summer learning. We also offer capacity building programs for summer learning programs and communities to both strengthen and expand summer learning opportunities. And finally, we're a convener of summer learning stakeholders, of providers, of other education leaders, policymakers, to discuss and advocate for summer learning as a solution for both equity and excellence in education. And our partnership with the Wallace Foundation on the National Summer Learning Project really cuts across all 3 of these strategic priorities. And we're committed to using what the Wallace Foundation is learning to build broad understanding of this important research in the field. And you'll hear more about this from the panelists today, but this isn't research that looks at students and programs as data in spreadsheets. The evaluators from RAND have spent hundreds of hours on the ground in summer programs. They're documenting the planning process, the practices on the ground, and the improvements that the districts are making year after year to inform a much broader conversation so that all of us here today can learn from what's happening in these 5 districts. And more broadly, these reports that they're producing are really creating foundational guides for the field. So we are very grateful to the Wallace Foundation for their leadership on this issue. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ann Stone to get us started. Again, she's a Senior Research and Evaluation Officer at the Wallace Foundation. Ann, over to you.
Thank you, Sarah. And before jumping into the findings of the new RAND report, I wanted to say a few words about the larger project that this research is a part of and how with it we're seeking to build greater understanding of summer learning. This group certainly is familiar with the research on summer learning loss. We all know that wealthier children tend to have greater opportunities for learning and enrichment during the summer, and for them, the summertime can be a time of gains. Low-income children, on the other hand, tend to have fewer opportunities and they can lose ground academically. According to some earlier research by RAND that's captured in a volume called Making Summer Count, we do know that some, though not all, individual summer programs can lead to achievement gains, but little is known about how to carry out such programs across large urban districts and what kind of impacts to expect from those programs. And the National Summer Learning Project that the Wallace Foundation is supporting is really designed to help answer those questions. This is the largest project. We're trying to go to the next slide, and we're having a little bit of difficulty, so if someone's able to, else is able to turn it over, that would be great. This is the largest project of its kind ever undertaken. It includes 5 school districts, Boston, Dallas, Duval County, Pittsburgh, and Rochester, along with 2 nonprofits, Boston After School and Beyond, and Big Thought in Dallas. The programs in the 5 districts share some common features. They're voluntary programs, they're 5 to 6 weeks long, and they include not only academics, but enrichment experiences like music and art. And many of these enrichment activities are provided by nonprofit partners. RAND is also a partner in this work. They're a highly respected independent research firm, and in this project, they are conducting a randomized controlled trial evaluation, which we know is highly credible to policymakers. It's measuring a number of outcomes, standardized test scores in reading and math, school year grades, attendance, and behavior issues like suspensions, and socio-emotional competencies like persistence. Now, many studies stop at understanding and measuring outcomes, but we know that that's really not enough because it's also important to understand how to achieve those outcomes. And for that reason, this project also includes a very strong focus on understanding the practical steps that districts can take to implement strong summer programs. Over the project's life, we're seeking to meet 2 connected goals. First, of course, is to directly benefit children with summer programs. And the second goal, is, as Sarah mentioned, is really to contribute to the national discussion on summer learning. And we're seeking to do that by providing policymakers with persuasive evidence on whether and how district summer programs can produce academic gains and other benefits for children. And the NSLA network is really exactly the kind of policymaker and practitioner audience who we're hoping can make use of this information. The project has 3 phases. We began in 2011 with 2 years of preparation to help the districts refine their programs so that they were both academically rigorous and fun for the participating children. We've just completed the second phase, which is 2013 and 2014, and those are the 2 summers whose impact on students we're measuring using the randomized controlled trial. And then the red arrow and the final blocks show that we're at the beginning of the final phase in this project, in which we'll learn whether and how the students benefited from those 2 summers of programming and what practical steps districts can take to effectively implement these kinds of programs. Going to the next slide, the lessons that were learned from the earlier years in this project are the basis of this 2013 report by RAND, Getting to Work on Summer Learning. And as Sarah mentioned, because there was a continuous improvement cycle built into this project, there's a lot of lessons learned that we hope people will take advantage of on topics like planning, staffing, student attendance, maximizing instructional time, and other topics. In the next chart, we see that that first report I just talked about is one in a series of RAND reports from this project. The red arrow is the next report, which we'll hear about in a moment. And the main point to draw from this chart is that the findings that we're about to discuss represent one chapter in an unfolding story. They tell us how the students in the study performed in fall of 2013 after just 1 summer of programming. The next report, which will come out later in 2015, will provide a fuller picture of the impact of one summer of programming on students by looking at additional measures. And then in 2016, we'll learn how 2 summers of programming affect students. And the last volume will summarize practical advice to districts about how to implement strong programs. So with that as background, let's turn to the new report on the next slide, Ready for Fall. And as a reminder, just want to note that all of these reports are available free of charge at wallacefoundation.org. So with that, Sarah, let me turn it over to you.
All right, great. Thank you, Anne. I'm not going to waste any time and go ahead and bring up our next speaker, Catherine Augustine, who's a senior policy researcher at the RAND Corporation. And Catherine will get your slides up and running in a second. Great.
Okay.
Take it away.
Thank you, Sarah. So it's a pleasure to be able to share with you our findings from the report that Anne described that looks at the near-term effects of the voluntary summer learning programs in the 5 districts Anne named on low-income students' learning opportunities and outcomes. And so I will say just a couple more words about the study itself, and then I'll turn to the outcomes, and I will talk about the implementation analyses that Anne described, in which we link features of the summer programs to those outcomes. And then I will summarize and provide some recommendations. So this study is a randomized controlled trial, meaning that when students applied to be part of these summer learning programs across the 5 districts, we randomly assigned them to either go through the district programs or to serve in what we call a control group. And through that randomization process, we can be assured that these students are relatively similar, particularly in terms of their motivation to attend the summer learning program. Researchers don't always have the opportunity to compare 2 groups of students that are equal in terms of their motivation to get the intervention or the treatment being studied. So that's an important distinction of this study. It's national in scope, as Anne described, meaning we're not evaluating whether or not this program simply works in one location, maybe because of some unique features associated with that location, but we're looking across 5 different programs that all had different features. They all use different curriculum, for example. So we're basically thinking of this study as a proof of concept, evaluating whether or not summer learning programs offered to low-income students in urban districts do benefit them. We follow those students for 2 years during the summers of 2013 and 2014, and we're primarily interested in their academic achievement, but as Anne mentioned, we are looking at other outcomes as well in terms of their social and emotional competencies, behavior, and subsequent attendance during the school years. And as Anne mentioned, we are collecting data on program implementation too. So there are 5,637 students in this study across the 5 districts. And as you can see from this slide, most students in the study are low income, with 89% eligible for a free or reduced price meal. And most are also non-white, with 47% African American and 40% Hispanic. Here are our research questions. The first question we had was simply whether or not voluntary summer programs offered by school districts can attract large numbers of students. We know that there are some programs offered by school districts that are mandatory for students, say, at threat of grade retention, and those programs certainly can attract students, but would students and their parents want to sign their kids up for voluntary summer programs? And we also were primarily interested then in the outcomes of these programs. Do they positively impact students both in the near term, right after they go through the summer programs, but also in the longer term as well as they progress through school? And we wanted to know what operational features of these programs appear to be effective. What is it about them that seems to be working or perhaps not working so well? And eventually in 2016, we'll say something about the program's cost effectiveness. We're now collecting data on how much they cost, and we'll be able to link that data to our outcomes data. So let me turn now to the near-term outcomes that we observed in the fall of 2013. So then, in the fall of 2013, we administered a general math and a general reading assessment to all of the students in the study, so both those who'd gone through the summer programs and those who were serving in the control group, during the 3rd to 5th week of the school year. So some school had elapsed, but not much. And then we simply compared the scores of the treatment students to the scores of the students serving in the control group. So we weren't looking at loss or gain over the summer, but we were looking at how those two groups of students compared at the end of the summer. And the first thing that we saw is that these programs appeared to offer students opportunities that they otherwise would not have had. This answers our first research question as to whether or not students and their parents would sign up for these voluntary summer learning programs. And sure enough, we saw that districts exceeded their target enrollment numbers, and most of them recruited more 3rd graders than they ever had in the past. And this is the grade level that we were following. And when we tested those students when they were in 4th grade, we also administered a survey to them asking them what they had done during the summer. And it was somewhat surprising to us that almost 60% of the control students reported on that survey that they did not attend any kind of summer program, not a summer camp, not even a 2-day program, not any kind of summer experience that was structured in any way. And remember that these were all students who had applied to be in the district program. So these programs might therefore be serving a need in their communities that parents aren't getting met through other programs in the community. And most importantly, we saw that the treatment students, those who had gone through the summer programs, did outperform the control students on the math assessment. All 5 of the districts contributed to this impact, and the effects that we see are reasonably large, particularly given that these are 5-week summer programs. Indeed, our estimate is about 20% of the math learning that occurs during a school year. So the difference between the control group and the treatment group was 0.11 of a standard deviation. That's the effect size. And when we look at how much 3rd graders learn in mathematics over a calendar year between the spring of 3rd grade and the spring of 4th grade, that achievement effect size is 0.52. So we're seeing about 20% of that in terms of the math learning that happened during the summer for the students in the treatment group. So when we talk about the study, we say that we conclude that those students, when they went back to school in the fall as 4th graders, had a meaningful advantage over the control students in terms of their math knowledge and their math skills. We did not see this same advantage in reading. We did not see that the treatment students performed better on the reading assessment that we administered, and we have several hypotheses as to why that might be. One is that we know that reading comprehension is a more difficult skill to move for students in 3rd grade and 4th grade. It's also more difficult to measure. There's more measurement error in reading assessments. The tests that we administered are Pearson products. They're nationally normed, standardized assessments. Still, there could have been error in our reading assessment. It could be the case that the control students did not lose ground in reading over the summer. When we administered that survey to all of the students, both control and treatment students reported that they read books and magazines at home at an equal rate. So it could be that the control students were not losing ground in reading. And it could be that something about these programs simply did not work, such as the quality of instruction or something else about them in terms of their reading program. As I said earlier, we looked at other impacts. One was social and emotional competency, and here again we do not see a difference between the treatment students and the control students on the measure that we used. And as Anne previewed, we are in the midst of analyzing 2013-14 school year data, looking at suspension rates, attendance rates, grades during the school year, performance on the spring state assessments in 2014 in math and language arts, and we will be reporting these findings this coming summer. So let's turn now to the implementation analyses that we conducted. And we did this in order to shed light on what's sometimes called the black box. Many randomized control trials tell us whether or not an intervention or a program works, but doesn't say much about why or why not. And so in an attempt to overcome that challenge, we did a lot of qualitative data collection, as Anne and Sarah both mentioned, including surveying all of the academic teachers, those teaching mathematics and language arts for the rising fourth graders. And we also observed in the summer of 2013 over 200 language arts blocks and 182 math blocks. So this slide lists the features of the programs that we examined, including students' attendance in them. And it also notes that these analyses are correlational. Because students were not randomly assigned to these features of the summer learning programs, these analyses are not causal, like the ones I just presented, but simply describe correlations between features of the program and students' outcomes. So in terms of mathematics, we see that both attendance and what we call dosage, or academic time on task, were related to higher treatment effects. So students who attended at least 22 days of the program, which is a high attendance rate, given that most of these programs were only 25 days in length, had the largest treatment effects. So these students not only still outperformed the control group, but they outperformed other students in the treatment group, as did students who received at least 26 hours of mathematics instruction. So more than an hour a day of math. Those students also had much higher effect sizes. Now, we don't see that same relationship with attendance and dosage for reading, but we do see that aspects of quality were positively related to students' reading outcomes. So students in the summer program who were taught by a reading teacher who had just taught either the sending or receiving grade during the school year had stronger treatment effects in reading. And we also, in our observations, used a measure of instructional quality, and teachers who were rated higher on that measure had students who performed better on the reading assessment than other students in the study. And finally, we asked teachers in our survey about student behavior at the sites in terms of bullying and fighting and time wasted in class due to addressing misbehavior. And students in sites in which there was not much bullying, fighting, etc., had stronger outcomes in reading. So I will provide a summary now, and my summary includes that these programs seem to provide opportunities that likely would not have existed for these families in these communities, and that a large number of students appear to be interested in them, with the districts successfully signing up more students than they had anticipated recruiting. And the students who did go through the summer learning program returned to school in the fall of 2013 with a meaningful advantage over their peers in mathematics. This was not the case for reading or for their social and emotional characteristics. Strong attendance and dosage provided an even greater boost in mathematics outcomes, and teacher qualifications, instructional quality, and what we are calling site orderliness were also related to improved reading outcomes. And so when we talk with these districts and other districts, as we're doing right now, we tend to give these recommendations based on the findings. If districts are intending to use their summer learning programs to improve students' math, knowledge, and skills, we recommend that the programs be designed for at least 5 weeks and offer an hour to an hour and a half of math each day. We also recommend coming up with ways to promote consistent attendance and encouraging teachers to adhere to the schedule in terms of those 60 to 90 minutes of math. And if districts are intending to improve reading outcomes through a summer learning program, we recommend that they try to recruit their most distinguished or effective teachers to teach in the summer. And once they have done that, to assign teachers to teach a grade level in the summer that aligns to the grade that they had just taught during the school year. And we also recommend providing professional development in advance of the summer program and then ongoing coaching, if possible, during the summer program to ensure the quality of instruction and provide teachers with feedback to improve quality. And finally, we recommend ways of maintaining positive student behavior in the programs. We've seen some programs implement some strategies for doing so to great effect. So we've been sharing some of those strategies as well. And I will now pause here and turn it back to Sarah, who will moderate any questions you may have on the study.
All right, thanks, Catherine. So remember to use your chat box. I don't see any questions that have come in from you all yet, but we had some that were pre-submitted online. So I'm going to go ahead and ask one of those questions and give you all a chance to come up with any that you have. We will pause again after Christine from Pittsburgh speaks, so there will be another chance to ask for questions. And make sure that you are sending the questions to everyone, all participants or all panelists, not just to the host. Okay, so well, I'll go ahead and ask Angela Duran's question that just came in over chat and save mine if we need it. But Angela's asking, Catherine, what did a typical day look like in the program? So how was the day structured and what was kind of the mix of experiences that a child might have experienced?
Okay, great. Well, even though the time of day that the program started varied a bit across the 5 districts, the structure of the days were very similar, with students arriving sometime around 8 a.m. and starting with breakfast. All of these programs provided breakfast, lunch, and a snack to students. And most of the programs provided the academic instruction in the morning. So there might be 90 minutes of math offered to some students while others did 90 minutes of reading, and then the students would switch so that they would go then into reading or math, whichever subject they had not had first. And most of the programs had teachers who were departmentalized, so teachers taught 2 blocks of math or reading in a row to 2 different groups of students. And then the students would have lunch, and then in the afternoon, they would participate in what we call enrichment activities. Not all of the programs called them that, but those activities ranged from water polo and swimming to cooking to rock climbing to fencing to the arts. And so students would either have a long block of one of those activities or have 2 blocks, 2 shorter blocks where they were switching among or between 2 activities, and then there would be dismissal. So there was some variation across the programs, but in general, that's how a student's typical day would progress. And the programs would end sometime around 4 o'clock.
Great, thanks, Catherine. We have several other questions that have come in, so we'll try to get through these quickly because they're all really great questions. John Spence is asking about the mathematics instruction and curriculum. So were there any districts that you know of that use any sort of blended instruction or used technology or tried out any kind of different curriculum than what they might typically use in the school year for math?
Most of the districts struggled to implement technology-based instruction during the summer. Duval County used SuccessMaker for some of its math instruction, and that worked well there, but many of the other districts either did not have access to computer labs or the internet during the summer, and so most of the math instruction was fairly traditional. Voyager Summer Math was used in some districts. Number Worlds was used in Pittsburgh. These tend to be direct instruction math curriculum, and so we didn't see any blended learning models for sure, and we didn't see a lot of technology used in the math instruction.
Okay. Next question, and this is one that we saw submitted online in advance as well. One of the biggest questions that summer program providers have is how to measure reading gains. And I know that, Catherine, you must have explored a lot of different options in the design of this study. What can providers learn from what you've learned about the best way to measure reading comprehension? Should they be looking at a pre- and post-summer assessment? Should they be looking more at, farther out into the school year? What do you suggest?
Great question. So yes, for this study, we wanted to use a nationally normed, standardized reading assessment. So we looked at a number of them and ended up with a Pearson product called the GRADE, G-R-A-D-E. And that was appropriate for this study, but might not be appropriate for a particular district wanting to look at reading outcomes. Yes, pre-post measures are a good way to go. And finding a measure that accurately reflects the goals for the summer program is also a good idea. For example, the test that we use, the GRADE, primarily measures reading comprehension. There's some oral comprehension or listening comprehension, but most of it is reading comprehension. There's some vocabulary questions. But I know that there are summer programs that have a more narrow focus in reading, and Christine might talk about this a little bit. But for example, Pittsburgh is thinking about narrowing their reading focus to focus more on oral reading fluency, and a good measure for that would be the DIBELS or the ORF. And so there are assessments that are more narrowly focused than the ones that we used that might be appropriate. And so, yes, doing a pre-post test is a way to determine the impact of the summer right after the summer program ends. But when you test students on their knowledge of what they've learned in the summer or reading in general, depends partly on the goals for the summer program. If you want the summer program to boost students' reading so that they're also performing better on the state tests in the spring, you could forego a post-assessment and look at those state tests and create a comparison group in your district of students who look like those who went through the summer program but did not go through the summer program. So whether you do a pre-post just looking at the kids who went through the program or use a later test, whether it's the state assessments or a district benchmark test administered sometime in the fall, and create a comparison group depends partly on the goals of the summer program and what you want to know about it.
Okay. I'm going to do one more. There were a couple questions about impact on subgroups. So, did you look at migrant students in any of these districts? Were their gains in math any different from the rest of the treatment students? And similarly, a question about English language learners and if you saw any different gains for that subgroup.
We did look at subgroups. We looked at English language learners. We looked at low-performing students compared to higher-performing students. And we did not see differences in terms of outcomes based on those characteristics. So these programs didn't appear to be disproportionately benefiting any of the subgroups that we looked at.
Okay, and two quick questions. I'm trying to get through all of them. Did districts provide transportation?
Yes, I forgot to mention that. Yep, transportation was free. The programs were free to parents with transportation and meals provided.
And what was the typical student-to-teacher ratio? And I know that might vary throughout the day.
Yeah, it was pretty low. So it ranged from about 8 students to 1 teacher to about 20 students to 2 teachers, with a paraprofessional serving as the second teacher. And then we did see in one district there were about 14 students to 1 teacher.
Okay, great. Okay, I'm going to keep going and we'll come back to any unanswered questions. So at this point, we're going to kind of transition from research even more into practice. We have a couple of examples here of superintendents in these districts speaking about their participation and sort of the impact of being a part of this study on what they're doing in the summer. So in Dallas, they've gone ahead and decided to expand their summer learning programs as a result of the findings, and they're continuing to use the research to make improvements to the program, but you know, they are seeing this as demonstrating what they want to see and are expanding. We also have the Pittsburgh superintendent here, Dr. Linda Lane, and you can see these videos on the Wallace Foundation's website. Here's some of the superintendents speaking about the summer learning project. And so to give even more of the Pittsburgh experience, I'm excited to introduce Christine Cray, who is a project manager for the Summer Dreamers Academy in Pittsburgh Public Schools. And Christine is going to talk about how their district is using all of the rich information and findings that they've gotten from RAND from being a part of the study. So Christine, over to you.
Thank you. As Sarah shared, I'm Christine Cray. I'm the project manager for the Summer Dreamers Academy, a summer learning camp run by the Pittsburgh Public Schools. We serve about 1,800 total students across K to 7, and a slice of those children were part of this national demonstration project. We've been working with the Wallace Foundation and RAND since 2011 and have been using their annual formative feedback reports to improve our programming each year. We've been anxiously awaiting the first round of outcome data related to the study for a number of reasons, a big one of which is to learn more about the impact that we're having on children, but of equal importance to understand what might be contributing to these outcomes or lack of outcomes so that we can make appropriate changes to strengthen the program. We were lucky to be able to get a preview of the results ahead of the national release, and we've been doing a lot of thinking on what they mean for us and what implications they have as far as informing changes both to our summer program but also to our school year practices. So first, like most people, we immediately keyed into the lack of outcomes in ELA. And initially, this was a big surprise and even a disappointment for us, given that we put so much emphasis on literacy within our program. But after we thought about it for a little bit, we realized it wasn't too surprising given the content of the curriculum that we use and some of the weaknesses that we see with implementation over the summer. On a whole, the fact that reading achievement measured broadly didn't show outcomes wasn't actually all that shocking. So our program, as I said, spans K-7, and we actually look internally at some student data that's available to us from school year assessments to inform our classroom groupings over the summer, but also to detect our own academic outcomes. So in our internal analysis, across the history of our programming, participation in Summer Dreamers, which we measure by the number of days attended, we see does have a positive, statistically significant effect on oral reading fluency scores for rising first through third graders. And that's based on a pre and post of the DIBELS assessment that our students take in the spring and again when they return to school in the fall. The outcomes were modest, and our internal research methodology is very different from that used by RAND in this study, but with a narrow measure on young students whose reading skills are still developing, we saw statistically significant outcomes from our program. So in thinking about this and about all of the research that speaks to the importance of building fundamental early literacy skills and the fact that that's an initiative that Pittsburgh Public Schools is currently undertaking, we knew that we had some changes to make in our literacy curriculum. We've been receiving good feedback overall from teachers about the National Geographic Summer Central program that we've used over the past several years, and we've been working to refine it each summer So we're still in the process of deciding what, if anything, from that curriculum we'll be incorporating into our redesigned programming for 2015. But we've taken a step back to consider the overarching instructional goals that we have for children over the summer, to refine them into narrow, focused, and achievable chunks, and to use that lens to determine the structure and content of our 90-minute daily ELA block. So right now our plans call for separating the block into two portions, a 40-minute period in which children are grouped homogenously based on ability level in mixed grade groupings to do daily word work, including intensive phonics, phonemic awareness, word building, and fluency practice. We know these are key skills that are essential for children to master in order to become proficient readers, and we want to address them more explicitly and intentionally. For the remaining 50 minutes, we plan to regroup children into leveled classes within their grade level, focusing on vocabulary and incorporating leveled reading, linking to the school year curriculum that they had the prior year, and also previewing content and skills that they'll see in the coming year. Part of our local feedback that really resonated was that differentiated instruction that was part of our ELA curriculum wasn't happening as intended in classrooms over the summer. It's a challenge that we face during the school year as well, despite the fact that it's a major area of focus from our curriculum department. So to make it as easy as possible for this differentiation to happen, we've built it into that structure in the ELA block. Teachers won't have as much work to do in order to differentiate compared to if they had a mixed ability class, and those individual curricular components will be matched to student levels ahead of time. Thinking about the program aspects that were correlated with higher outcomes in reading, we were really happy to hear that all of our efforts to ensure that teachers are matched to summer teaching assignments based on their grade level experience was worthwhile. We've always prioritized placing teachers in classrooms that align with their school year grade level experience, and now that we have credible evidence that it's important, that's very helpful. We're using it to inform our staff recruitment to make sure that we have a wide variety of candidates across the grade levels that we need, and also to explain decisions to folks when we communicate offers. Sometimes a teacher who will work with 4th or 5th graders during the year wants to mix it up and work with kindergarten or 1st graders over the summer, and we're able to point to data that shows that they likely won't be as effective with those students. Of course, it wasn't surprising to hear that higher quality language arts instruction was also positively correlated with outcomes in reading. That's causing us to revisit our professional development and training plans to make sure that we include plenty of modeling of strong practices, and also to think about how we use our instructional coaches over the summer, both to monitor instruction and to support teachers to ensure that elements of quality, such as checking for understanding and addressing misconceptions, are present across all classrooms. Finally, related to high-quality ELA instruction, we've got a pretty robust and comprehensive teacher evaluation system here in place in Pittsburgh, in part due to state law in Pennsylvania and largely in relation with our involvement in the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation work and empowering effective teachers. We've made a lot of progress in the past years in terms of how we select staff for our summer program. So instead of following a standard collective bargaining agreement with our teachers union, choosing summer teachers based on seniority, we've created a separate memorandum of understanding to direct staffing for summer dreamers. That allows us to evaluate candidates based on responses to questions that probe their motivation, evidence of prior success in the classroom, their ability to create a dynamic learning environment, how they use data to deliver effective instruction, and how they work with colleagues to achieve broad goals. So we're thinking about how we can further modify our recruitment and selection process for staff using the data that we have about teacher performance during the school year to target effective teachers to apply for summer opportunities, and how these correlational findings inform the elements that we consider in our selection and placement process for staff. We're also thinking about what elements of our teacher evaluation process are worth folding into our summer practices. So specifically, we have a school year focus on student learning objectives to track progress, and we're thinking about how we can incorporate that into our summer to observe outcomes at the end of the program. Next slide, please. Hearing that the orderliness of summer programs correlated with outcomes in ELA was interesting for us. As a district, we've placed a lot of importance on developing strong school cultures and climates, and have focused a lot on the way that the learning environment influences instruction and achievement. So it was good to have those school year efforts reaffirmed. We also place a large focus on developing strong, positive cultures at each of our summer sites, but recognize that there's always room for improvement in that area. Knowing that our efforts to establish these warm and welcoming sites are not a waste of time or resources, we're considering how we can be more intentional about designing for site orderliness. One component, of course, is more support for teachers so that they're equipped with a framework for handling behavior management in their classroom and in the informal program setting, such as transitions, lunch, and recess. We also know that we have to be much more clear in setting explicit expectations for culture and positive behavior management with our site leadership teams, and in turn, site staff. In past years, we've taken for granted that because we use district staff over the summer and broadly communicate our program rules to work hard, be nice, and have fun, that folks are on the same page about how they interact with students, and they understand the importance of maintaining that positive and supportive atmosphere. We're recognizing, again, that we need to be more intentional in reinforcing that, and similar to modeling in ELA classes related to the curriculum, there's need to do some modeling for teachers and staff in those areas. Because we're bringing together children and staff from over 30 different schools in very new arrangements over the summer, we're also focusing on intentional strategies for community building, both for staff and for students, and for the overall site. We usually operate at 3 locations and have about 75 staff members and between 500 and 600 children at each. So we know we need to include multiple layers of this. We want community building related to Summer Dreamers as a whole, for the overall site, and most importantly, for individual classrooms and groupings of students. One way that we accomplish this is through our daily all-camp morning meeting, a community meeting to energize staff and students and provide a positive start to the day. Again, as a district, we're thinking more about how to improve relationships between adults and students during the school year, and also thinking about how that relates to improving our school year discipline data. So again, there's lots of practices that are applicable from school year to summer and vice versa. Next slide, please. Of course, the math outcomes were a point of pride for us and something to celebrate, but then also something to look at closely and learn from. In Pittsburgh, as Catherine said, the math curriculum that led to these outcomes was based in the McGraw-Hill Number Worlds program, and it involved each student taking an initial assessment to determine their baseline skills and knowledge. Their performance on this assessment was used to determine which units they focused on over the summer to address gaps in knowledge and avoid spending the bulk of the summer reviewing content that they'd already mastered. At a high level, it makes perfect sense. We see what students do and do not know, provide instruction in what they don't know, and we see great outcomes. But in theory, that was the same approach we took in a slightly different way in ELA. We looked at school year assessment data to identify individual areas of need. And thinking about why we saw outcomes in math but not in ELA, we feel part of it is that in math, in the curriculum that we had in the structures in summer 2013, there was a very clear process and structure for grouping students based on assessment data. In our ELA classes that summer, the data was provided to teachers and our coaches supported them in using it to implement differentiation within the block, but it wasn't taking place in practice. So again, we're intentionally modifying the structure of our ELA block this year to group students in a way to facilitate that differentiation in hopes of increasing fidelity of implementation. It's also interesting, based on teacher surveys, they really did not like the approach that we took with administering a pretest and regrouping students at the start of the program. They thought it was a little bit chaotic. It didn't allow them for pre-planning since they weren't sure which students would be focusing on which topics until after the first day of the program. And so that's causing us to think about some pre-testing that we can do at the end of the school year to be able to have that data ready for the week before program starts for teachers to really dig into. We're definitely not just going to perpetuate the math curriculum indefinitely, saying that it worked and we're going to continue using it as is. We did make some tweaks based on teacher feedback between summer 2013 and summer 2014, and we're considering what these outcomes mean in terms of potentially reverting back to our original model or tweaking it in different ways for 2015. And of course, we're very interested in seeing the next round of outcomes based on our 2014 programming, but we won't have those available until after we've already finalized our curriculum for this summer. As I've been saying, we're thinking about what these math curriculums mean also for our school year practices. How do we highlight these and use them to inform changes to increase our impact on students from September through June? Of course, the correlation between program attendance and the number of hours of instruction being linked to better outcomes in math helps us to reinforce messaging around the importance of regular program attendance, as well as our district efforts to improve school year attendance. We have a citywide campaign supported by our local United Way called Be There, pushing the importance of school year attendance. And it actually came out of some early findings related to summer program attendance. In looking at our school year attendance rates in a way that tracked chronic absenteeism, we caught students who missed several days of school each marking period. In our attendance reporting related to AYP, this was masked. But when we look at individual student attendance records, it became clear that although some schools may have 90% attendance rates across the board, they have significant populations of students who are missing large chunks of the school year. Finally, and the basic information that came out of the study related to the demand for summer programming and how many children did not attend any type of programming, even having registered, is really powerful. It helps to have these data points to share out with funders and policymakers, and as we consider long-term sustainability plans. And as I said, we're eagerly awaiting the next round of outcome data, especially to see how factors such as school year attendance and behavior are related to summer program attendance. We see these markers as being really important. In closing, we really value our partnership with Wallace and Rand and appreciate all of the information that our work with them generates in the spirit of continuous improvement of our program and working towards outcomes for children. And now I'll turn it back over to Sarah Pitcock to moderate questions.
Thanks, Christine. Thanks for going so deep, I will say, on behalf of everybody who's muted on the phone. There were a lot of really concrete tips in there and takeaways and examples, and I know that's really what everybody's looking for. So thank you for sharing all of your lessons learned with us. I have one question that came in about how districts are funding their programs. So I can provide an answer based on kind of the data we collect across the country, and then maybe Anne, you could speak about any Wallace's support for the programs and any other funding that they're bringing in. But typically we see that districts are using a few different funding sources. Title I is a popular choice for summer programs. It's an allowable use. General funds typically are also allocated in the summer. 21st Century Community Learning Centers are the federal funding that can be used for summer programs. And then most districts that we work with and see across the country that are doing summer learning programs at any degree of scale also have some private funding. So Anne, I don't know if you want to jump in and talk about Wallace's funding for these programs.
Yeah, Sarah, as you were answering the question, I was just jotting down what we have seen in terms of funding sources across the 5 districts that are part of this demonstration project, and it's the exact same for categories that you mentioned.
Okay, great. Yep, so we really recommend as well that kind of braiding together. It's more sustainable, and it seems to really be working for the districts that are in our New Vision for Summer School Network, which is where we're getting a lot of our data from.
And this is Catherine. I'll just add that Pittsburgh is a good example of a program that has garnered local foundation funding. So I'm sure Christine could answer questions about that. And then in Dallas, they have actually corporate funding as well, so supporting aspects of their program, particularly the enrichment part of the program. And then some states like Texas have other funding sources, such as for educating bilingual students during the summer. So there are some categorical funding sources that vary by state.
Great. And then we have, unsurprisingly, a couple more questions related to transportation. I always say if I could solve that problem, I think I could save the world. So yes, I can answer. Pittsburgh did provide transportation. And then the question, does transportation availability increase attendance rates? And Catherine, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think there is some evidence maybe from the research literature that transportation does increase kind of the quality and the outcomes of programs. Is that right?
We don't see that in these programs. They all do provide transportation, so we don't have a counterfactual. But in some of the programs, like in Pittsburgh, if students live within 1.5 miles of the summer site they're assigned to, they do not get transportation. So we have looked at differences in attendance rates between those who are eligible for a bus and those who are not eligible for a bus, and we do not see differences in attendance rates.
Okay. All right. That was very helpful. And Sebastian had a question about are there summer programs for middle and high school students? And the answer is definitely yes. I think nationally there are more for middle school students than there are for high school students. And there are the most for elementary. And I think that is because of childcare issues and you know, elementary school students need a place to be the most, and I think that districts and community-based organizations kind of respond to that. So yeah, that's the answer to that question. Let's see, were there any others that came in? Okay.
Sarah, I saw one on whether or not we looked at the programs the control students went to in the summer, because there were some control students who did attend summer programs. And in that survey I referenced, we asked all of the students whether or not the summer programs they attended included reading instruction and or math instruction. So we were able to put together some models that compared our treatment students to control students who had gone to a summer program. They self-reported that they had reading and math, and we do see that our students still outperform them. And so we don't believe that our outcomes are underestimated because some of the control students went to other academic programs.
Okay. Great. Thank you. Well, I think we actually got through most of these questions. One I'll ask, and hopefully someone can answer it speed round in 1 minute, but just kind of, you know, in the spirit of continuous improvement that's at the heart of this effort, you know, what are some of the changes that you're seeing districts work on? Maybe Catherine, you can answer this, that might be, you know, related to the folks listening here on the webinar.
Well, I think some of the districts were surprised by our finding in reading that students had better outcomes if they had a teacher who just taught the sending or receiving grade. Many districts had given teachers an opportunity to try out other grades in the summer, which also makes sense. A teacher might want to switch to a new grade, and summer seems like a good time to sort of practice that. But if you think about it, the summer time is very short, you know, 5 or 6 weeks, and teachers who just taught a grade that the students are coming from or going into are intimately familiar with the standards for that grade level, with that age group and their developmental stage, and they're more likely to be able to hit the ground running. You know, we interviewed kindergarten teachers teaching third graders and high school teachers teaching third graders, and they just felt like they had a foreign species in front of them, and it took them a while to get to know that age level. So most of the districts we're working with are now really focusing on that grade level alignment in the summer, which is something that they had not all thought to do in the past.
Great. All right. Well, I hope everyone on the webinar will join me in thanking our panelists. And don't sign off just yet. We have a couple of announcements and a poll that is one question and so important to us. But thank you again to Anne and Catherine and Christine for sharing everything that you've learned today, and for everyone participating for asking such great questions. The conversation will definitely continue. You can find the report, if you haven't already found it, on the Wallace Foundation's website. Be sure to also visit the Knowledge Center on the Wallace Foundation's website for all of the reports that we've referenced today on summer learning. And save the date for National Summer Learning Day. It's Friday, June 19th. By the end of March, NSLA will have posted a new website, a new map for you to post your summer learning programs and events on to be part of our big national count. We're trying to reach 700,000 kids with a summer learning opportunity through our map this year. So please be a part of that. And then another exciting announcement is that our national conference is coming up October 12th through 14th here in Baltimore, in our hometown. We are very, very excited. We're kind of changing the schedule a little bit this year to incorporate more youth participation. So we're really excited about that. But it is the only national conference exclusively focused on this issue. And we really encourage you to sign up and join us. Registration will be open, I believe, next week. So visit summerlearning.org to see more about that. Larry's going to put up our poll. So please just answer our one question. How will you use the information you learned today? And you can choose all that apply. And if we haven't put your answer there, type it in the second field there. But we really want to know, get a sense of who's here with us today and how you're going to use this information. So thank you in advance for submitting the poll. And I'm going to put up some contact information for folks at NSLA, at the Wallace Foundation, and at the Hatcher Group, who is our media relations firm that's been working with Wallace and with NSLA on this work. And thank you all so much for joining us. We look forward to being in touch. I will send out the recording and the PowerPoint. And you know, we're here to take your questions and your follow-up and to kind of connect you with experts and answers as we go. So don't hesitate to reach out to NSLA. Thanks so much and have a great day.
Good. Worked.